Billionaire's daughter made her last request to Maid. What she did next left her father stunned. Maurice lay on the hospital bed in her pink princess nightgown, her small frame almost hidden beneath the white sheets. The machines beside her beeped softly, each sound a reminder that time was slipping away. Sweat covered her pale forehead, her once bouncy curls now flat and tangled. Claudia Jefferson sat close, her simple grey scrubs wrinkled from long hours. Her dark caramel skin glowed faintly in the soft bedside light as she wiped the little girl's face with a cool cloth. She whispered gentle words, though her voice trembled with worry. Maurice's eyelids fluttered, and her frail voice broke the silence. "Claudia, will you be my new mommy?" The question froze Claudia's hand in midair. Her eyes filled with tears. This wasn't just a child talking. It was a plea from someone who knew her time was running out. She took Maurice's trembling hand and whispered through the ache in her throat, "I'll take care of you. I promise." But what Claudia discovered next about Maurice's treatment would expose a secret so shocking, it would turn the Hogan mansion upside down. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Tomorrow's story will touch your heart. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Clarkson Hogan used to believe that every problem had a solution. In his world, logic and data ruled over emotion. At 36, he was one of the youngest billionaires in the tech industry, a man whose ideas reshaped how the world stored and accessed information. Hogan Industries, his creation from a college dorm room, had grown into a global empire. He was tall, with sharp features and sandy brown hair already showing streaks of gray at the temples. His staff often saw him in perfectly tailored suits, but lately, his shirt stayed wrinkled, collars unbuttoned, and eyes red from sleepless nights. He once had everything: power, respect, and a family that made his life complete. His wife, Victoria, was the heart of his world. She wasn't just beautiful, she was compassionate and grounded, the one who reminded him to slow down when work consumed him. Their home was full of laughter and warmth until the night everything changed. 2 years ago, Victoria's car skidded off a wet highway as she drove home from a charity event. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. Clarkson had been in a board meeting when he got the call. He still remembered the sound of his phone hitting the floor as the words sank in. After Victoria's death, their mansion lost its soul. Every corner held a memory he wasn't ready to face. Only their daughter, Maurice, gave him reason to keep going. She had Victoria's curls and smile, the same curious spark in her eyes. But grief had turned Clarkson into a man constantly hiding behind work. He spent long hours in his penthouse office, staring out at the city lights while his daughter played alone in the nursery. He told himself that keeping busy was how he stayed strong, but deep down, he knew he was running from the pain. Months passed, and Maurice began to change. At first, it was small. She grew tired easily, lost her appetite, and preferred naps to games. Then came the morning she fainted during breakfast. Clarkson's world stopped. He rushed her to the hospital, clinging to hope as doctors ran tests. When the diagnosis came, a rare and aggressive blood disorder, he couldn't process it. The doctors spoke in complicated terms, describing genetic triggers and uncertain treatments. All Clarkson heard was that his little girl was dying. Money could fix almost anything, he thought. So he threw everything he had into saving her. He hired specialists from across the world, funded new research programs, and demanded experimental therapies. He built a private medical wing in the mansion, turning his home into a place that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Machines beeped where laughter once echoed. Nurses and doctors moved through the halls in silence, their faces hiding the pity they felt for him. He started losing touch with himself. His days blurred into endless meetings and phone calls, searching for breakthroughs that never came. Nights were worse. He would stand outside Maurice's room, listening to her labored breathing through the door, terrified to go in. He couldn't bear to see how thin she'd become, how her small body fought so hard to stay alive. It felt like losing Victoria all over again, but this time, slower, crueler. The household staff tried to stay strong, but the tension was heavy. Caregivers came and went. Some left because they couldn't handle watching a child suffer, others because they couldn't deal with Clarkson's cold distance. He didn't mean to push them away, but grief made him impatient, demanding, and hard to reach. Every failed treatment felt like another personal failure. When the last caregiver quit without notice, the agency sent a replacement, Claudia Jefferson. Clarkson barely glanced at her when she arrived. He introduced her to the doctors, explained Maurice's condition like he was reading from a report, and left her to do her job. She was just another employee, another temporary figure in the endless rotation of nurses and aides. Still, something about her quiet confidence unsettled him. She didn't seem intimidated by the mansion or by his reputation. She spoke gently but with purpose, her words calm and measured. Clarkson dismissed her kindness as professionalism. He had learned not to hope, not in doctors, not in caregivers, not even in miracles. He returned to his office that evening, closing the door behind him. The city skyline stretched before him, bright and alive, a stark contrast to the stillness that filled his home. He stood there in silence, remembering how Victoria once stood beside him in that same spot, laughing about how success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. Now, all he had left was a sick child and a heart too afraid to break again. He told himself he was doing everything he could, but deep down, he wondered if he had already failed her. In the weeks that followed, he buried himself deeper in work, delegating Maurice's care entirely to the medical team. He trusted the process, the science, the experts. He believed they were giving her the best chance. What he didn't know was that the real danger wasn't her illness. It was hidden in the very treatments he was paying for. Claudia Jefferson's arrival would change everything, but Clarkson didn't know it yet. He had no idea that the woman he barely acknowledged would soon uncover a truth that would tear apart everything he thought he knew, about medicine, about trust, and about what really happened to his wife. Claudia Jefferson was not easily shaken. Life had taught her to stay calm, even when everything around her was falling apart. She grew up in a small, working-class neighborhood on the south side of the city, where people shared more struggles than secrets. Her mother worked double shifts at a laundromat, while her father drove a delivery truck. They didn't have much, but they had each other. That was enough, until her younger sister, Emily, fell ill. Emily was only 8 when she was diagnosed with a rare heart condition. Claudia, then 16, spent every day at the hospital, helping her mother spoon soup into her sister's mouth and reading bedtime stories by the window. When Emily passed away 2 years later, something inside Claudia changed. She promised herself that no one under her care would ever feel forgotten or alone. That vow led her to a career in caregiving, where compassion mattered more than credentials. By the time the agency assigned her to the Hogan estate, she had already worked in several homes, some filled with kindness, others with tension. But nothing compared to what she felt the moment she stepped through the gates of the Hogan mansion. The estate was enormous, with a long driveway lined by trimmed hedges and stone statues that looked like they hadn't seen laughter in years. Inside, marble floors reflected light from chandeliers that seemed too bright for such a silent place. Expensive paintings lined the hallways, yet the air felt cold, untouched by life. She could feel grief in the walls. It clung to everything: the silver-framed photos of a smiling woman and a little girl, the scent of lilies that lingered from old memorial bouquets, the echo of footsteps that faded too quickly. For all its beauty, the house felt empty. The luxury only made the loneliness louder. Claudia met Clarkson Hogan briefly on her first day. He was polite but distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. His handshake was firm but quick, and his eyes barely met hers as he gave a brief summary of Maurice's condition. He spoke in medical terms, like reading from a report, before handing her a folder and leaving the room. To him, she was just another caregiver filling a position that had turned over too many times. Maurice, however, was different. The child lay quietly on her hospital-style bed, her small body wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at Claudia with wide, tired eyes that seemed far too old for her age. At first, she didn't speak. She just watched as Claudia moved around the room, checking medication charts and adjusting pillows. It took patience, something Claudia had plenty of. Instead of forcing conversation, Claudia began humming soft, familiar tunes her mother used to sing when the world felt too heavy. Maurice listened quietly. The next day, Claudia added a story, simple ones about flowers that danced in the rain or stars that whispered to each other at night. The child didn't react at first, but Claudia kept at it, her voice steady, her presence constant. A week later, something changed. While cleaning the bedside table, Claudia heard a faint giggle. She turned, surprised, to see Maurice smiling weakly at one of her silly story endings. It was the first smile the nurses had seen in weeks. From that day, Maurice began reaching out, literally. During treatments, when pain wrinkled her little face, she would extend a trembling hand, and Claudia would take it without hesitation. The bond between them grew quietly but firmly, built on trust and patience. Still, as the days passed, Claudia started to notice things that didn't sit right with her. She had worked in many homes, but this one had patterns that made her uneasy. Medication deliveries often arrived late at night, long after the regular pharmacy hours. The boxes came from an unmarked van, handled by men who avoided eye contact. The labels on the containers were generic, some with faint company names she didn't recognize. She also began noticing that Maurice's condition worsened after certain treatments. Each time the doctors administered a blue-labeled injection, the child would grow weaker within hours. Her breathing would become shallow, her energy drained. When Claudia asked one of the nurses about it, the woman brushed her off with a practiced smile. "It's normal for patients to feel tired after this treatment," she said flatly, refusing to meet Claudia's eyes. Claudia wasn't satisfied. She began keeping a small notebook tucked inside her apron pocket, recording everything she saw, the timing of medications, the nurse rotations, Maurice's reactions, and even the names printed on the supply boxes. Each entry felt heavier than the last. She didn't want to believe that something was wrong, but the evidence grew too hard to ignore. One evening, as she helped Maurice settle into bed, the little girl whispered, "Why do they give me that blue shot? It makes me sleepy." The question twisted Claudia's heart. She didn't know how to answer, only that something about that medication didn't feel right. She promised Maurice softly, "I'll find out, sweetheart." The next morning, Claudia approached the head nurse, a stern woman named Ms. Harlan. She waited until the nurse finished her rounds, then asked carefully about the late-night deliveries. The nurse's face turned cold. "Those are authorized supplies," she replied sharply. "You're here to assist, not to question medical protocol." Her tone ended the conversation. That warning should have scared Claudia into silence, but it only deepened her concern. Each time she wrote in her notebook, her notes became more detailed, her handwriting tighter. She started matching Maurice's symptoms to medication times, connecting dots the doctors didn't seem to care about. She couldn't shake the feeling that something about the treatments wasn't meant to heal. The more she watched, the more the routine felt like a script being followed without question. The doctors spoke confidently, but their words didn't match Maurice's declining health. At night, Claudia sat by the window in her small staff quarters, flipping through her notes under the dim bedside lamp. Her instincts told her the truth was buried somewhere between those doses and deliveries. She didn't yet know how deep the problem went, but one thing was certain: Maurice's illness wasn't the only danger inside the Hogan estate. Claudia tried to tell herself it wasn't her place. She was hired to care for Maurice, not to question doctors or challenge billionaires. But every instinct told her something wasn't right. The child's body was fading faster than it should have, and the professionals in charge acted as if everything was normal. Each time she saw that blue-labeled syringe, her stomach tightened. Each time Maurice winced in pain afterward, guilt clawed at her. One night, she decided to stop wondering and start watching. The mansion was quiet except for the steady hum of machines in Maurice's room. Most of the staff were asleep, but Claudia couldn't rest. She slipped on a sweater and quietly stepped into the hallway. From the window at the end of the corridor, she noticed headlights flashing briefly near the side gate. Her heart thudded. She moved closer, peering through the glass. A black van idled near the loading dock. Two men stepped out, not wearing medical uniforms, just plain dark clothes. They carried small metal containers marked with white stickers. Claudia squinted to read the name printed in bold letters across one, Genesis Biotech. She had never heard of the company before. The men worked quickly, unloading boxes into the side entrance near the medical supply room. There were no signatures, no paperwork, no nurse to receive them. Within minutes, the van disappeared into the night. Claudia stood frozen, gripping the window frame. None of this matched standard medical procedure. The next morning, she waited until her shift break and pulled out her phone. Typing Genesis Biotech into the search bar, she found a string of troubling results. The company had been sued multiple times for unapproved drug testing and falsified research data. Most cases had been quietly settled, but the pattern was clear. They had a history of conducting secret medical trials under the guise of legitimate treatment. Claudia's hands trembled as she scrolled. Could Maurice be part of something like that? She opened the medication log in Maurice's file and compared it to the prescription labels on the new bottles in the storage cabinet. The dosages didn't match. Some of the drug names were different altogether. One entry had been altered with a pen, initials scribbled beside it in a hand she didn't recognize. Her stomach turned when she saw the blue-labeled injection listed under code number instead of a name. She traced back her notes and saw a clear pattern. Every time that injection was given, Maurice's condition worsened. Her fever spiked, her heartbeat slowed, her body went limp for hours. Yet the doctors insisted it was a necessary part of her treatment. That afternoon, she gathered the courage to approach Clarkson Hogan. He was in his office, surrounded by papers and glowing screens, typing furiously on his laptop. She waited for a pause that never came. Finally, she spoke softly. "Mr. Hogan, may I speak with you for a moment? It's about Maurice's medication." He didn't look up. "What about it?" "I think something might be wrong," Claudia said carefully. "Some of the doses don't match the prescription records. And there were late-night deliveries from a company called Genesis Biotech. I checked their background, and—" Clarkson's typing stopped, but his expression didn't change. "Claudia," he interrupted, his tone clipped. "The doctors know what they're doing. Please don't complicate things. We're following an advanced protocol. Every treatment has been approved." "But—" "Enough," he said quietly but firmly, finally meeting her eyes. His were tired, the kind that had seen too much disappointment. "I hired you to take care of my daughter, not to audit her medical team. They're the best in the world. Trust them." Claudia bit her lip, holding back tears of frustration. She wanted to argue, but his walls were too high. He wasn't angry, just broken. He couldn't handle more uncertainty, and she understood that. So she nodded and left the room, feeling smaller than she had in years. Back in Maurice's room, she sat at the bedside and held the little girl's hand. "I promised I'd take care of you," she whispered. "I meant it." The child stirred faintly, her tiny fingers squeezing back. That touch reminded Claudia that she couldn't give up. A few days later, she found an unexpected ally. Maria, the housekeeper who had been with the Hogans since before Maurice was born, stopped her in the hallway. Maria was in her late 50s, kind but cautious, the type of woman who saw everything yet spoke little. "You've been asking questions," Maria said quietly, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Be careful. People who ask too much around here don't last long." Claudia hesitated. "Maria, do you know anything about Genesis Biotech? Or why their supplies keep showing up here?" Maria sighed deeply. "I shouldn't say this, but you remind me of Mrs. Hogan. Victoria used to ask the same kinds of questions before her voice faltered. Before the accident." Claudia's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "There was talk back then," Maria continued softly. "Victoria had some kind of medical condition. Dr. Frost, one of the same doctors treating Maurice, was involved in a program he said would change medicine forever. She didn't tell Mr. Hogan much, just that it was experimental but safe. A few weeks before she died, she started looking worried, asking for her medical files. Then the crash happened." Claudia's chest tightened. "You're saying Victoria was part of a medical program? Connected to Genesis Biotech?" Maria nodded slowly. "I can't prove it, but the timing fits. Same doctor. Same delivery company. I remember seeing those same boxes years ago, before Mrs. Hogan's accident." The room seemed to tilt for a moment as Claudia processed the revelation. Both mother and daughter, under the care of the same doctor. Both receiving treatments tied to the same company. And both showing mysterious declines instead of improvement. Maurice's illness might not be a tragic coincidence at all. It might be the result of something far more deliberate. Claudia's fingers tightened around her notebook. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't medicine. It was manipulation disguised as care. She didn't know how deep it went yet, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't stay silent anymore. Claudia knew she was getting close to something dangerous. Every instinct screamed that she should stop asking questions, keep her head down, and just do her job. But she couldn't, not when she had seen the fear in Maurice's eyes after another round of injections, not when she had learned what happened to Victoria. Late one evening, sitting at the edge of Maurice's bed, she opened her small notebook and stared at the dates, the drug codes, the strange symbols printed on the boxes from Genesis Biotech. None of it made sense to her medically, but she knew someone who might understand. Dr. Samuel Wright. He was an old colleague from her nursing days at St. Vincent's Hospital, a man who still believed medicine was about healing, not profit. Years ago, Claudia had covered for him during a difficult night shift when his own mother was in surgery. He had never forgotten it. The next morning, she sent a discreet message. "Need your help. Urgent. Confidential." They met later that evening at a quiet diner on the edge of town. The kind of place where the waitresses called everyone hun and the coffee never stopped flowing. Claudia slid into a corner booth, her bag heavy with the evidence she'd gathered, copies of prescription labels, medication logs, and a few photos she'd taken of the Genesis Biotech deliveries. When Dr. Wright arrived, his face softened into a tired smile. "Claudia, it's been years." "It has," she said, her voice low. "I wish I were reaching out for better reasons." He noticed her shaking hands and gestured for her to breathe. "Tell me what's going on." Claudia laid everything out on the table, the notes, the labels, even the photos. For several minutes, Wright flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each one. Finally, he looked up. "These aren't standard treatments," he said quietly. "Some of these drugs haven't even been approved for pediatric use. This one," he pointed to the blue-labeled vial, "was pulled from testing years ago after severe side effects in adults. It's not supposed to be anywhere near a child. Claudia felt her throat tighten. So they're experimenting on her. He hesitated. If Genesis Biotech is involved, that's very possible. They've been caught before, using unapproved compounds in clinical trials disguised as legitimate therapies. But it's hard to prove. They hide behind layers of corporate ownership and medical jargon. Still, he closed the folder and met her eyes. I'll look into it. Quietly. Don't tell anyone you spoke to me. Claudia nodded, relief and dread swirling inside her. She paid for her coffee, thanked him, and left before anyone could notice them together. Back at the Hogan estate, she couldn't sleep. The pieces didn't fit, and she needed to see more. Around midnight, she remembered something, an old brass key she'd found while cleaning the medical supply room a few days earlier. It was small, unmarked, and tucked inside a forgotten drawer. At the time, she thought nothing of it. Now, she had a feeling it mattered. She waited until the halls were silent before slipping into the supply room. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic. She aimed her flashlight toward the back wall and found a tall, gray filing cabinet with a lock. Her heart pounded as she tried the key. It fit perfectly. The drawer creaked open, revealing a stack of thick folders stamped confidential, Genesis Biotech trial participants. Claudia's hands trembled as she pulled one free. Inside were medical consent forms, charts, and authorization letters. At the top, she saw Clarkson Hogan's name, his signature scrawled neatly across several pages. The documents described an experimental gene therapy program, supposedly for rare genetic disorders. Maurice's name appeared in multiple sections: age, blood type, dosage schedules. But something didn't add up. The consent date was nearly a month before Maurice's illness was ever recorded in her medical chart. And the signature, though it resembled Clarkson's, looked subtly off. Too deliberate. Too clean. She flipped to another folder. This one carried Victoria Hogan's name. The paperwork was almost identical. Same doctor listed, Dr. Nathan Frost. Same company. Same trial code. A chill ran down her spine. Victoria's death wasn't just a tragic accident. She had been part of the same experimental program her daughter was now enduring. And if the timelines were correct, it wasn't Clarkson's decision either. Someone had forged his consent to enroll both mother and child. Claudia snapped several photos with her phone, then carefully returned the files. She locked the cabinet and slipped out, her heart racing so loudly she could barely hear her footsteps. The next morning, her phone buzzed. Dr. Wright's voice came through, low and urgent. "Claudia, listen to me carefully. I dug into Genesis Biotech." Her breath caught. "What did you find?" "They're under federal investigation. It's not public yet, but the reports are damning. They've been running unauthorized drug trials on vulnerable patients, elderly, terminally ill, even children, without proper consent. They disguise the trials as innovative treatments, but what they're really doing is collecting live data to sell to bigger pharmaceutical firms." Claudia pressed the phone tighter against her ear. "Maurice, she's one of them." "I'm afraid so," Wright said. "And from what I found, Dr. Nathan Frost has direct financial ties to Genesis Biotech. He's been listed as a consultant in several of their patents. My guess is, he convinced Clarkson to agree to a treatment plan without disclosing its true nature. If Clarkson didn't sign those forms himself, Frost could have easily falsified them." Claudia closed her eyes. The walls of the estate suddenly felt colder, heavier. So all this time, he thought he was saving her. Yes. He's being manipulated. But if you expose this, Claudia, you'll be putting yourself at risk. These people have money and influence. She didn't hesitate. "Maurice doesn't have time for me to be scared." There was silence on the line for a long moment. Then Wright said softly, "Be careful. Document everything. I'll support you from my end." When the call ended, Claudia stared out the window toward the garden where Maurice sometimes sat during her better days. The sunlight caught the child's frail face through the glass, and something inside Claudia hardened. They had taken enough from this family: Victoria's life, Clarkson's peace, and now Maurice's future. She wouldn't let them take anything more. Claudia gathered her notes, checked that her phone's photos had saved properly, and slipped her journal back into her apron pocket. Whatever the cost, she was going to bring the truth to light. Because sometimes, the only way to heal a broken system is to stand up to it, even if you're standing alone. Maurice's breathing had grown shallow, each rise of her chest weaker than the last. The steady beeping of the heart monitor suddenly turned erratic, a desperate alarm filling the sterile quiet of the room. Nurses rushed in, their voices rising, machines clicking, wires tightening. Claudia's heart hammered in her chest as she held the child's frail hand. "Maurice, sweetheart, stay with me," she whispered, tears burning behind her eyes. The little girl's lips parted slightly, her skin clammy. Claudia could feel the tremor in her fingers as they gripped hers for the briefest moment before going limp. A nurse shouted, "Her pulse is crashing." "Prepare another injection," came the clipped voice of Dr. Nathan Frost as he entered, white coat swaying sharply at his knees. His tone carried the confidence of authority, but to Claudia, it sounded hollow. "No," she cried out, stepping forward. "That's what's making her worse. You can't give her that again." Dr. Frost didn't even look at her. "Security," he barked. "Get her out of here." Two men moved toward her, but Claudia didn't budge. She planted herself by the bedside. "You're poisoning her," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. "You're killing her with your experiments." The door burst open. Clarkson Hogan entered, his usually composed presence shattered by panic. He had been in his study when the alarm sounded. His tie hung loose around his neck, his face pale as he took in the chaos, the medical team scrambling, Maurice's small body barely moving beneath the tangled tubes. "What's happening?" he demanded. "What's going on?" Dr. Frost turned, his expression grim but controlled. "Her condition has taken a sudden turn. I'm trying to stabilize her, but this," he gestured toward Claudia, "is interfering with her care." Clarkson's eyes darted between them, confusion clouding his face. "Interfering? Claudia, what are you doing here?" Claudia turned to him, desperation breaking through every word. "Mr. Hogan, please listen to me. Your daughter isn't dying because of her illness. She's dying because of these treatments." She reached into her apron and pulled out the folder she'd been carrying for days. Her hands trembled as she spread the papers across the table near the bed. "These medications, the forged consent forms, the company Genesis Biotech, it's all connected. She's part of an unapproved drug trial. Those injections are toxic." Dr. Frost's tone grew sharp, almost mocking. "This is absurd. Mr. Hogan, with respect, she's a maid. An untrained woman who's confused correlation for causation. You hired me to save your daughter, not to entertain conspiracy theories." Claudia's voice broke but didn't waver. "I may not have your degrees, doctor, but I know when a child is in pain. I've seen her get worse after every one of your treatments. I have records, dates, dosages, photos, everything. Dr. Wright, a licensed physician, confirmed these drugs aren't approved for children." She turned back to Clarkson. "Please. Look at her. She's fighting for her life, and they're still injecting her with poison." Clarkson's jaw tightened. His eyes, weary from months of grief and sleepless nights, moved slowly from Frost's confident stance to Claudia's tear-streaked face, then to his daughter's still body. For the first time, doubt flickered. Dr. Frost stepped forward, lowering his voice. Mr. Hogan, she's emotional. You've been under immense stress. Don't let this woman manipulate you when your child needs immediate medical attention. But the word manipulate made Clarkson's eyes narrow. His gaze dropped to the papers Claudia had spread out. His own signature on the forms, the mismatched dates, the Genesis Biotech letterhead. He recognized his handwriting, or thought he did, but something about it was off. Too careful. Too practiced. Claudia's voice softened. She asked me to stay. She said she was scared of the medicine. You've trusted the wrong people, Mr. Hogan. Please, trust your heart this time. At that moment, a faint sound broke the tension. Maurice stirred weakly, her eyelids fluttering open. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Claudia, don't leave me. The words hit Clarkson like a hammer. He froze, watching as his daughter's tiny hand reached toward the woman who had been by her side when he could not. It wasn't Frost she wanted. It wasn't any of the nurses. It was Claudia, the one person who had shown her tenderness when medicine had failed. Clarkson stepped forward, his voice low but trembling. Stop all treatments. Dr. Frost blinked. Mr. Hogan, that's not advisable. You're putting her at risk. I said stop. Clarkson's tone sharpened. Every injection, every medication. You stop now. I want every vial tested independently. I want to know what's been going into my daughter's veins. Dr. Frost's calm facade cracked. You can't just shut down a treatment protocol. You'll regret this decision. Clarkson's eyes hardened, his grief giving way to fury. The only thing I regret is letting you anywhere near my family. You lied to me. You promised hope and delivered pain. Now get out of my house before I make good on every legal threat I can muster. Frost straightened, his jaw tight. You're making a mistake. This woman will destroy everything you've built. Clarkson took a step closer, his voice quiet but deadly. I've built empires, Doctor. I can rebuild them. But if I lose her because of your greed, there won't be a corner of this earth far enough for you to hide. Dr. Frost backed away, signaling the nurses to stand down. The tension in the room thickened as the monitors steadied slightly under the cessation of medication. Claudia collapsed into the chair beside Maurice, clutching the little girl's hand. Clarkson watched her for a long moment before quietly saying, "Stay with her, Claudia. Don't leave her side." For the first time in months, he didn't feel helpless. He felt something else, a fire reigniting, a father's will to fight back. Clarkson didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, the same room where he'd spent months trying to fix the unfixable, staring at the papers Claudia had placed in front of him. The evidence was undeniable now. The same steady hand that had signed company deals worth billions appeared on those medical forms, but it wasn't his. The forged signature glared back like a cruel joke. By morning, the mansion was no longer filled with quiet medical routines but the sound of lawyers, investigators, and independent doctors moving in and out. Clarkson had called his legal team before dawn. His voice was calm but hollow when he said, "Find me the truth. Whatever it costs." Dr. Samuel Wright arrived mid-morning, a kind man with tired eyes who carried himself with quiet authority. Claudia greeted him first, explaining Maurice's condition and everything she'd witnessed. Clarkson watched from the corner of the room, his arms crossed tightly, as Wright gently examined his daughter. After a long hour, Wright looked up from the test results. "These compounds in her system," he said gravely, "they don't belong here. They're experimental and not approved for pediatric use, some not even cleared for human trials." Clarkson's throat tightened. "Are you saying she's been used as a test subject?" Wright nodded slowly. "I'm afraid so. The levels of toxicity in her blood suggest she's been given these substances regularly. They've been breaking her down from the inside out. Claudia closed her eyes, a tear escaping down her cheek. Clarkson sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. The air felt heavy, every breath painful. Over the next several days, Clarkson's lawyers began digging deeper. They traced transactions, emails, and records linking Dr. Nathan Frost to Genesis Biotech. What they found sent shockwaves through the team. Large payments made to Frost's private account under consulting fees, but the timing matched perfectly with the dates of Maurice's treatments. Genesis had been paying Frost for each high-profile patient he enrolled in their experimental gene therapy trials. Clarkson listened to the findings in silence, his face pale. "So my daughter wasn't a patient," he finally said. "She was a business deal." That same day, one of his lawyers brought an old file from storage, Victoria's medical records. Clarkson had locked them away after her death, unable to face them. Now, trembling, he opened the folder. Among the documents was a toxicology report he'd never read in full before. The report listed unusual chemical compounds found in Victoria's bloodstream, unfamiliar names, the same ones now appearing in Maurice's tests. Dr. Wright confirmed it. The same substances that poisoned Maurice had been in Victoria's body when she died. Clarkson's world tilted. He saw flashes of memory, Victoria's headaches in the months before her death, her trembling hands, her sudden dizziness. Doctors had dismissed them as stress symptoms from her charity work. Now he saw the truth. She had been another experiment. His voice cracked as he whispered, "They killed her too." Claudia, standing nearby, felt her heart break for him. She had seen strong men collapse under grief, but nothing compared to this. The moment a father and husband realized both the loves of his life were victims of greed. Clarkson stood, pacing toward the window, his reflection ghost-like against the glass. "I signed those forms thinking I was helping her," he said quietly. "They forged my name, but I let them in. I trusted them because I was desperate." "Desperation doesn't make you guilty," Claudia said softly. "It makes you human. You didn't know. But now you do, and you can still save her." Her words hung in the air, steady and certain. For the first time in months, Clarkson looked at Claudia not as an employee, but as someone who had carried the strength he'd lost. He turned back toward the room, his eyes resolute. "Then we bring them down, all of them." From that moment, everything moved fast. Clarkson's company resources turned toward uncovering the full truth. His legal team coordinated with federal investigators, providing financial records, communication logs, and internal memos linking Genesis Biotech to a web of corruption. Evidence showed that the company targeted wealthy families with sick relatives, offering exclusive, cutting-edge treatments. In reality, they were conducting unauthorized experiments, using the family's status as shields against scrutiny. Dr. Frost had been their star recruiter. His charm, credentials, and access to high-profile clients made him the perfect pawn. For every patient enrolled, he earned a fortune. For every one that died, he buried the evidence beneath medical jargon and grief. When agents arrived to question him, Frost maintained his arrogance. But the mountain of evidence, bank records, lab reports, falsified consent forms, spoke louder than his denials. He was arrested at his private clinic 2 days later. Genesis Biotech executives soon followed. The charges: fraud, medical malpractice, and multiple counts of manslaughter. News outlets swarmed the story, dubbing it one of the largest medical ethics scandals of the decade. Families across the country came forward with eerily similar stories. Loved ones lost after receiving experimental treatments that were never approved or monitored. Clarkson refused interviews, focusing instead on Maurice's recovery. His only public statement was brief but powerful: "My daughter was nearly killed in the name of progress. My wife lost her life to greed." No family should ever suffer that again. That night, he returned to Maurice's bedside. The beeping of the machines was calmer now, her breathing steady as she slept. Claudia sat beside her, reading softly from a storybook, her voice gentle in the quiet room. Clarkson watched them for a long time before speaking. "You were right," he said quietly. Claudia closed the book and looked up. "I only followed what she needed." "You followed what was right," he replied. "Something I forgot how to do." He glanced down at Maurice, then back at Claudia. "If you hadn't come into this house, she'd be gone. They both would." Claudia's eyes glistened, but she smiled faintly. "She's going to make it. That's what matters." For the first time in years, Clarkson felt a sense of purpose that didn't come from numbers or innovation. It came from truth, and from the promise that the people who had destroyed his family would never hurt another soul again. The change came slowly, like morning light seeping through heavy curtains. For the first time in months, the house felt alive again. The endless hum of machines quieted, replaced by the faint sound of birds outside Maurice's window. The air smelled of lavender instead of antiseptic. Dr. Wright's team took over Maurice's care with careful precision and deep compassion. The first few days were the hardest, cleansing her system of the toxic experimental drugs that had nearly destroyed her. Her body trembled, her skin pale and clammy, but Claudia never left her side. She held Maurice's hand through every restless night, whispering stories when the pain grew unbearable. Weeks passed, and the improvement was undeniable. Maurice's cheeks regained color, her voice grew stronger, and her laughter, soft and uncertain at first, became a sound that filled every corner of the house. The legitimate treatments were working, finally giving her the strength she had been robbed of. Clarkson often stood quietly at the door, watching. The sight of his daughter coloring on the bed, her curls bouncing as she giggled with Claudia, brought him to tears more than once. He would retreat before they noticed, part guilt, part awe, but every day he stayed a little longer. Claudia had been officially hired as Maurice's full-time caregiver and companion, though in truth, she had long since become something more. Her calm presence grounded the household. She and Maurice spent mornings reading in the sunroom, afternoons drawing, and evenings talking about dreams Maurice had for when she got completely better. One afternoon, as they sat cross-legged on the carpet surrounded by crayons and scattered sheets of paper, Maurice drew a picture with 3 smiling stick figures, herself, Claudia, and her father. She proudly held it up. "This is us," she said. "My daddy, my Claudia, and me." Claudia blinked back a tear. "You're Claudia," she teased gently. Maurice nodded solemnly. "You're mine. You make me feel safe." Later that evening, Clarkson joined them for dinner, a simple meal, the kind that felt human again. Maurice, still in her bright hospital gown but with a healthy flush on her cheeks, looked at her father with wide, hopeful eyes. "Daddy?" she asked between bites. "Yes, sweetheart." "Can Claudia stay forever?" Clarkson froze, glancing at Claudia across the table. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he smiled, his voice warm and certain. "She's not going anywhere." Maurice beamed, clapping her hands. Claudia looked down, humbled, her heart full. The estate began to change along with them. The sterile equipment was cleared out, replaced by flowers and sunlight. Maurice's old playroom, once locked away, was reopened. Claudia helped her organize toys and books while Clarkson watched from the doorway, remembering how silent this space had been since Victoria's death. Now, laughter echoed through the halls again, pure, unrestrained, healing. Even Maria, the longtime housekeeper, seemed transformed. She had always been kind but cautious, moving through the mansion like a ghost who feared to disturb the air. Now she hummed while she worked, her eyes brighter. One afternoon, She asked to speak with Clarkson and Claudia privately. They met in the study, where Maria held a small metal box in her trembling hands. "I kept this hidden," she said, her voice unsteady. "After Mrs. Victoria passed, I noticed things that didn't feel right. Paperwork, deliveries, locked cabinets. I wanted to say something, but I was scared. The doctors, they had power. I didn't." She opened the box to reveal stacks of papers, photocopied records, and a few old USB drives. "These are from the time before Claudia came. I didn't understand them, but I knew they mattered." Clarkson took her hands gently. "You did the right thing, Maria. Your courage helped make this right." Maria shook her head. "No, sir. It was her courage," she said, looking at Claudia. "She saw what we didn't dare to." Claudia's eyes filled. "We all did what we could. None of this would have happened without all of us standing together." The documents Maria provided were turned over to the authorities, strengthening the case against Genesis Biotech and Dr. Frost. Clarkson made sure Maria received full recognition for her role, quietly, respectfully, as she preferred. Months later, Maurice was healthy enough to attend her first outing beyond the estate grounds, a walk in the nearby park with Claudia and her father. The sun was warm, the breeze light, and for the first time in a long time, Clarkson allowed himself to breathe freely. He held Maurice's small hand, listening as she chatted about everything she wanted to do when she got all the way better: painting, learning piano, and visiting her mother's favorite charity home. Claudia walked beside them, smiling. There was still grief in Clarkson's eyes, but now it was mixed with purpose. A few weeks later, in a quiet ceremony at the hospital where Dr. Wright worked, Clarkson announced the establishment of the Victoria Hogan Foundation for Medical Ethics. The goal: to ensure no patient, rich or poor, would ever again become a victim of hidden trials or medical exploitation. Clarkson spoke simply, his voice steady. "This foundation exists because my wife's memory and my daughter's survival deserve more than silence. They deserve change." Claudia stood beside him, now serving as an advisor to the foundation. Her first-hand knowledge of caregiving and her unwavering pursuit of truth made her the perfect voice for patient rights. Her quiet strength had become the moral compass of the initiative. Reporters asked how she felt about the transformation from housekeeper to advocate. Claudia smiled modestly. "I just wanted to help a child heal. Everything else grew from that." When they returned home that evening, Maurice was waiting with another drawing. This time it showed 4 figures: herself, her father, Claudia, and her mother standing under bright yellow sun. She handed it to Clarkson. "She's watching us now," Maurice said softly. Clarkson looked at the drawing for a long moment, his eyes moist. Then he smiled. "Yes, she is. And she'd be proud." Claudia placed a hand on his shoulder, and for the first time, he didn't feel the weight of guilt pressing down. Instead, there was gratitude, deep, grounding, and alive. As night fell, laughter drifted from the playroom, mingling with the scent of dinner and the gentle hum of life returning. The mansion that once echoed with grief now pulsed with love, resilience, and second chances. Maurice's voice carried through the hall, bright and sure. "Daddy, come play with us." Clarkson met Claudia's eyes. They shared a knowing smile before joining the little girl, no longer a patient, but a survivor surrounded by family, finally free. 6 months later, the Hogan estate was unrecognizable from what it once was. The cold sterility that had hung over every corner of the mansion had been replaced by laughter, sunlight, and the bright chaos of a child's life finally restored. The garden, once an overgrown, forgotten stretch of land, was alive again. Roses climbed the stone walls, and the sound of Maurice's giggles floated on the warm afternoon breeze. Her hair had grown back thick and curly, framing her face in soft brown waves. Every morning before preschool, she would twirl in front of the mirror, proud of the tiny ribbons Claudia tied in her hair. "I look like Mommy, don't I?" she'd ask. Clarkson always smiled and nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Claudia had become more than a caregiver. She was family. She still cooked Maurice's favorite meals, still told her bedtime stories, but now she sat at the family table with Clarkson. Their roles had evolved into something built on trust and shared purpose. They spoke often about the Foundation's progress, the schools they had visited, the hospitals they had supported, the families they had helped protect from predatory practices. The Victoria Hogan Foundation was growing faster than anyone expected. The lawsuit against Genesis Biotech had made national headlines. The company was dismantled piece by piece after the investigation revealed a pattern of deception spanning years. Families across the country came forward, many with stories eerily similar to the Hogans. The settlement funds were redirected to patient protection initiatives, and Dr. Frost's name became synonymous with greed and betrayal in the medical world. Through it all, Clarkson remained composed in public, but those closest to him, Claudia, Dr. Wright, and Maria, knew the emotional toll it took. He often spent late nights in his study, staring at an old photograph of Victoria, his expression unreadable. Claudia sometimes found him there and would quietly place a cup of tea beside him. "She'd be proud," she'd say softly. He would nod, eyes glistening, and whisper, "I hope so." Now, on a bright Saturday morning, the mansion was alive with celebration. Maurice's 5th birthday had arrived, a milestone that once felt impossible. The garden had been transformed into a wonderland of balloons, ribbons, and laughter. Children from her preschool ran across the grass, chasing bubbles while music played in the background. Maria busied herself at the refreshment table, beaming as she handed out cupcakes, while Claudia guided a group of kids through a treasure hunt. Clarkson stood near the gazebo, watching his daughter laugh freely under the open sky. It had been a long road, but this moment, was everything he'd prayed for. When the time came for speeches, Clarkson gently tapped a glass to get everyone's attention. The chatter quieted as he stepped forward, holding the microphone. Maurice sat on Claudia's lap, her little legs swinging. "I'm not much for speeches," Clarkson began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "But today isn't just a birthday. It's a celebration of miracles, of second chances, and of one extraordinary woman who refused to give up when everyone else did." He looked at Claudia, who froze in surprise, a blush rising in her cheeks. "Claudia," he continued, "you saved my daughter's life, not just medically, but by loving her when I was too broken to do it myself. You saw her not as a patient, not as a burden, but as a little girl who deserved to laugh, to dream, to live. And because of that, she's here today, healthy, strong, and full of joy. For that, I'll never be able to thank you enough." There was a brief silence before applause erupted. Claudia's eyes filled with tears as she stood, taking the microphone with trembling hands. "I didn't do it alone," she said, glancing at Clarkson, then at Maria, and finally at the crowd. "Maurice fought harder than anyone I've ever known. And Mr. Hogan, he found the courage to face the truth, even when it hurt. I just made a promise. And I always keep my promises." The words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Maurice jumped up from her chair, running into Claudia's arms. "You're my hero," she whispered, clutching her tightly. Claudia laughed through her tears, pressing a kiss to the top of Maurice's head. "No, sweetheart. You're mine." The celebration carried on with laughter and music, but for Clarkson, time seemed to slow as he watched the two people who had changed his life. He saw his wife's warmth in Claudia's compassion, and his daughter's resilience in every smile. For the first time since Victoria's passing, he felt peace, real, grounded peace. Later, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, the garden emptied, leaving only the three of them. Maurice played near the fountain, chasing the golden light that shimmered across the water. Clarkson stood nearby, his hands in his pockets, watching her with quiet pride. Claudia sat on the garden bench, her face calm and content. "She's a miracle," Clarkson said softly. Claudia smiled. "She's a promise kept." A comfortable silence followed. Birds chirped in the distance, and the air carried the scent of blooming roses. Clarkson turned to her, his expression sincere. "I don't think I ever thanked you properly." "You don't have to," Claudia replied gently. "You already did, every time she smiles." He nodded, his eyes lingering on his daughter. "Still, I want you to know. You're part of this family. Always." Claudia's voice trembled slightly. "That means more than you know." Maurice ran back toward them, her laughter filling the air. "Come on," she called. "Let's walk together." She took both their hands, one small, warm hand in each, and began leading them down the garden path lined with white blossoms. They walked slowly, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. The scene was simple, yet it carried everything that mattered: love, redemption, and the kind of bond that outlived pain. Narration: sometimes, the strongest promises aren't written in ink but kept in quiet moments of courage. A single maid's promise exposed corruption, saved a child's life, and rebuilt a broken family. What began as an act of compassion became a legacy of hope, proof that love, when it's genuine, can heal even the deepest wounds. The screen fades to the image of Maurice laughing, holding both Claudia's and Clarkson's hands as they walk beneath the twilight sky, a family not defined by blood, but by love, sacrifice, and promises kept. And that's how one maid's promise changed everything. One act of courage, one moment of compassion, and a simple promise that saved a life, restored a broken family, and exposed a system built on greed. If this story touched your heart, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because tomorrow, we're sharing another powerful story that you absolutely won't want to miss. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, and share what you think about Claudia's courage. Do you believe one person's compassion can truly change the course of someone's life? Your support is what keeps us going. Every like, comment, and subscription helps us continue bringing these meaningful stories to life. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for being part of a community that believes kindness still matters. We'll see you in the next one.